Thank you, Madam President. The position of the Russian Federation on the so-called international, impartial, independent mechanism on investigation of international crimes in Syria remains unchanged. The Syrian mechanism is an illegitimate body from the very outset. It does not have the right to exist. Its establishment for the benefit of selfish interests was forcefully pushed through the General Assembly by the collective West. They did not care at all that the General Assembly, as a result, was acting ultra-vires in violation of the division of competences between main bodies of the UN as laid out in the UN Charter. Establishing this mechanism without the consent of the Syrian Arab Republic or decision of the Security Council under Chapter 7 of the UN Charter is a violation of the fundamental norms and principles of international law, including the principle of sovereign equality of states and non-interference in their internal affairs. Accordingly, this mechanism and all of the outcomes of its work are null and void ab initio. Without prejudice to our position, I'd like to comment on a few aspects of the latest report of this illegitimate body, which we've been forced to gather here once again to discuss today. The document once again lacks any information on what exactly the mechanism does, and yet it's financed by the UN regular budget. I remind you that Western countries forced through this procedure for deferring its cost despite the objections of many delegations, and now reading the verbose document of the mechanism, we are forced to guess where the budgetary funds are going. The document once again contains general statements about the collection and analysis of a great deal of evidence in various strategic areas. As always, the sources for this material in the report include some NGOs and so-called UN partners. The mechanism's leadership continues to refuse to provide a list of these sources under the pretext of confidentiality. But we still don't understand why so much secrecy. Could it be because the sources of financing of these NGOs grossly contradict the mechanism's supposed independence and impartiality? Given the nature and methods of work of this mechanism, there's no doubt that this so-called evidence does not meet the criteria of relevance and admissibility, which make them useless for national jurisdictions. And by the way, this entirely applies as well to evidence of ISIL's crimes, trying to seize on this hot-button topic in a vain attempt to somehow justify its own existence. The mechanism, in practice, is simply devaluing the evidence regarding international terrorists' crimes. We also pointed out that according to the report, the mechanism has mobilized the work of certain field missions to collect evidence which it was unable to obtain remotely. And so the question arises, what missions are these? Whom is employed by them, and on what basis are they present in Syria? A few other issues. We're concerned that this illegitimate body, which hypocritically champions confidentiality when it's convenient for it, has somehow been able to obtain material from classified OPCW archives. That's a direct violation of the Convention on the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, as well as the confidentiality policy of the OPCW. We call on the Secretariat to take measures to immediately put an end to this practice. In addition, the report implies that the mechanism has requested copies of materials from the joint investigative mechanism of the UN and OPCW. We've repeatedly stated that we do not believe the SG's bulletin ST/SGB/2019/4 is sufficient to authorize access to the JIM's archives without the prior consideration of that issue by the Security Council. And the Council, as we all know, did not give its authorization for this. And lastly, we've pointed out the mechanism's willingness to provide information and analytic materials related to legal actions brought against the Syrian Arab Republic by Canada and the Netherlands. And so this so-called independent and impartial, allegedly UN body is so eager to support its main founders and beneficiaries, that is Western countries, as part of the process against Syria. So where is this vaunted impartiality? Madam President, the Syrian mechanism is a purely political instrument of the collective West, and the entire raison d'etre of which boils down to putting pressure on an undesirable government. All of the work of this body is blatant interference in the internal affairs of a sovereign state. At the same time, this Western plaything, year after year, continues to siphon money from the U.S. regular budget. I think it's time to put an end to this. The government of the Syrian Arab Republic is capable of itself rendering justice and prosecuting perpetrators without external interference. Thank you, Madam President.